Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good morning, everyone. We're just going to give it a few moments for folks to filter on into the Zoom room. And then we can go ahead and get started.
Room the speakerphone. All right. Why are you not in there? Are you in there?
Alrighty, we still have some people filtering in, but I can go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sujin Kakumanu. I'm the Secretary of All Aboard Ohio, and I'm going to be kicking off the meeting today. So for those of you who have attended statewide meetings before, welcome back. But to those of you who are new to statewide meetings or to All Aboard Ohio as an organization, I'm just going to give a quick rundown. So All Aboard Ohio, as our logo implies, we've had about 50 years of advocating for enhanced public transit options in Ohio. We bring together citizens, business leaders, community members, especially through our work in the past year organizing the statewide coalition. And then again, we're pretty much run by a group of volunteers. So myself, the rest of the board of directors are passionate about this, and we take time out of our days and our weeks to help organize this and put this together. And like I mentioned, we are advocates for a robust transportation system serving all Ohio residents. So increased buses, trains, whether it's intercity, within cities, a focus to just connect communities, residents, businesses, and revitalizing especially the underserved parts of our state. In the past year, we support nonpartisan research on the benefits of passenger ground transportation. So in past statewide meetings, we've talked about our economic impact study that we had commissioned by Scioto Analytics that talked about the economic impact and benefits of the 3C+D corridor, so the passenger train line that would link Cleveland, Columbus, Dayton, and Cincinnati. And how do we do it? Again, we are volunteers, but we do rely on membership. So thank you to all who are on this call who are members and generously donate through just general donations that we receive from individuals and businesses, and then also grants. So that economic impact study that I mentioned earlier was possible through a grant by the Columbus Foundation. We also have 4 active chapters in Cincinnati, Columbus, Cleveland, and Toledo that also meet monthly. So if you want more information on that, you can go to our website at allaboardohio.org. In our events section, we have the dates, times, and locations for our monthly meetings at our active chapters. We also have statewide Zoom meetings, and if you're on this call, you've found one of those opportunities to interact with us. We put together that statewide passenger rail coalition with municipal planning organizations, municipal leaders, state political leaders, and just in general advocates. So a list of a few upcoming events. So the biggest one that we have coming up, and I would encourage everyone on this call to attend, is our annual meeting. It will be happening at the 4-H auditorium at Ohio State in Columbus on July 13th. It starts at 9:30 a.m. and the tickets are $50, but they include breakfast, coffee, lunch, and you will be having the chance to hear from Harvey Miller, who is a professor at Ohio State. And then we also have the vice president of network development from Amtrak president. So the theme of that meeting is going to be Ohio's rail renaissance, because the state used to have a robust passenger rail system. And now we are once again facing the opportunity to have that. So we will be talking about the history of that system, where we could go, and then how we could reach that amazing future. But again, we'll be having that keynote address from Nicole Rusich, who is the vice president of network development at Amtrak. So again, I encourage everyone who's on this call to check out our website at allaboardohio.org and purchase tickets for the event. One of the statewide, or one of the local chapter meetings that I'd like to highlight is we're going to be doing a maintenance facility tour on June 15th at 11 a.m. for the Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railroad. The registration link will be available on our website as well. And then in our Cincinnati chapter, we'll be doing a streetcar facility tour on June 28th. Our central chapter meeting will happen on Saturday, June 15th at the Grandview Heights Library, 10 a.m. And then our Cincinnati chapter meeting will happen on Wednesday, June 26th at the Walnut Hills Library at 6 p.m. The Toledo chapter meeting will be happening at the Amtrak station on Friday, June 14th. And now I would like to introduce the topic of our meeting today, which is the Better Bus Coalition. So the reason we wanted to highlight this organization today during our statewide meeting is because All Aboard Ohio is built around the principles of advocacy, and advocacy at higher levels, so within municipal governments and statewide government, but also from a grassroots level. And Better Bus Coalition is a perfect example of a grassroots organization. And its goal is really to support investment in Hamilton County's bus system. So it was founded in 2017, and the Better Bus Coalition works to mobilize riders, engage public and private entities, and activate the community to push for a revamped bus system that provides true mobility and economic viability for the Cincinnati region. So today on the call, we have Mark Saman, who is one of the founders of the Better Bus Coalition. And he's here today to share the story of the grassroots organization that achieved their goals through advocacy. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it off to Mark.
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
All right. So my name is Mark Saman. I'm a co-founder of the Better Bus Coalition. And currently in my day role, I'm the short-range planning manager at Cincinnati Metro. I started working at the end of 2019. But prior to that, I and other folks in the coalition had a pretty fruitful time advocating for new investment into Cincinnati's bus system. And I'm here to talk to you today about kind of what the issues were, why we did what we did, and then what we did. And what had to happen in order to get this, what ended up being a tax levy passed. No. Next slide, please. So we'll start with what were the main issues. So many of you will know, but Cincinnati's bus system was taken over in 1972. It was a privately run company formerly the Cincinnati Street Railway, which had become an all bus system by the 50s, 60s. In 1972, was taken over after a tax levy was passed in the city of Cincinnati. It was an earnings tax levy, which is basically an income tax, but a little different. And that was to fund the system moving forward until a countywide tax levy could pass, and it never did for about almost 50 years. And a lot of the issues that solved in the 70s were funding issues, but what ended up happening over time was with the suburbanization of our region, tax base kind of moving out into the suburbs and exurbs and other counties, as well as residential population loss in the city. This had led to what they call a death spiral. So fewer riders means service gets cut, which means that you get less fare collections, which causes more cuts. And then every once in a while, there's a recession, and that hits your tax base. Primarily the Great Recession in 08, 09, 2010, that really put a damper in Metro's operations budget, which had caused large service cuts and fare increases through the 2010s. Next slide, please. So our goal was to reverse this trend. We wanted more public funding for our bus system, particularly in Cincinnati, Hamilton County, and eventually the wider region, in the 8-county region. At that time, in sort of the mid-2010s into 2017, there wasn't that much discussion, if any at all, about the city's bus system, which was sort of every year seeing decline in ridership with some service cuts happening with that. And also at that time was the construction of the Cincinnati streetcar, a project that I very much loved and still love. But what it really showed was there was a lot of excitement about the streetcar and potential rail, and the bus system was sort of put on the back burner. And as a bus rider, and with my friends and colleagues being bus riders, it kind of created this feeling like, hey, we have this existing bus system that many people ride and that is aging. There needs to be, like with the streetcar, there needs to be a group of folks that are pushing for it to be better. And it wasn't seen as like it's a competition about rail or buses. It's just, this is a big part of our existing transit network and it needed investment. So this group, so the three folks you see in that picture there, I'm on the left. This is sort of a part of the core group of the system. It's me on the left, Mr. Cam Hardy there in the middle, and Mrs. Barbara Wolf there on the right. So our primary goal was to expand the bus system in Hamilton County through a new tax levy. What that would look like, we were not sure, likely a sales tax levy. But we did know that at the end of the day, you could probably find some money to fix problems, but if you wanted expansion and modernization, you definitely needed more money. Next slide, please. So that was our big goal, but there were other goals too. Part of riding the bus in Cincinnati is understanding that many of the bus stops are not great. If there's anything there at all besides a sign on a pole, that would be a blessing, especially back then. Buses also got stuck in traffic throughout the city at congestion points. We wanted to see bus lanes and other improvements on city streets to help speed up service. The bus fleet was aging pretty rapidly. I think the average age in the fleet was like 8 or 9 years. It's supposed to be 6 or less. But basically that just meant that older buses were on the road for longer. Which just meant they break down more, which means that people don't get to where they need to go. And then finally, we wanted bus riders to be appointed to SORTA's board. And I'm going to be using SORTA and Metro sort of interchangeably. It's the same thing. But SORTA is the actual board and overarching public agency that owns and runs the bus system, which is called Metro. But they are basically the same. Next slide, please. Yep, there we go. All right. So after the group of us had met, mostly through online, and then real world events, trying to speak with community leaders and elected officials, we all sort of met over time. We needed to build momentum. We wanted this to not just be a group of angry people. We wanted broad-based support across Hamilton County. If you're going to pass a countywide tax levy in Hamilton County, you cannot just rely on the city of Cincinnati's voters. They are not the majority of the voting base in the whole county. So it needed to be much more regional, starting with Hamilton County, hopefully in the future, moving to the other counties as well. So we, in order to build momentum, media loves a sob story. And at the time there was, in 2017 in particular, there was a service cut that was set to reduce some service by about $1 million a year on particular bus routes in Cincinnati. So the media was covering those cuts and, how bad the system was getting and, potential for fare increases on top of cuts. So that kind of, that we noticed there was this sort of media environment around Metro. And so that made it a little easier for us to, get in contact with journalists, particularly at the Cincinnati Enquirer and WVXU and Channel 9 at WCPO. Particularly the Enquirer had hired a transportation reporter. So that was a pretty easy person to get in contact with and spread our story. We did different places call this different things, like a bus stop audit or a street audit. But we invited people in community leaders to walk around their own communities with us to see the quality of the bus stops that they drive by every day. Most community leaders do not take the bus. See the quality of their bus stops, get on a bus, talk to bus riders on the bus. They're not scary. They don't bite. They're just people, just like us. And really getting that, you can read oh, Metro's not doing well, but actually seeing it with your eyes and having somebody who knows what they're talking about explain why it's bad was a big plus. Another thing was we were active and positive in social media, and not just that, but in real world conversations with just regular members of the public or with electeds or community leaders. It's easy to be doom and gloom, but people actually do want solutions. People like to complain and all that, but people want things to get fixed. And then regularly attending real world public meetings and events, whether they were related to Metro or there was a city council race at the time and a mayoral election. So that provided a lot of opportunities to talk to quote unquote important people and try to sway them to our side. Next slide, please. Another thing that we learned was that if you're going to complain, you better have a solution if you want to be taken seriously, or at least the idea of a solution. So we started asking for specific attainable improvements, and I'll get a bit more into that when we get to the elected slide. But things like, we can sit here and say, we want the bus system to be better. We want it to be fixed. But what that looks like is we want a newer bus fleet. We want bus benches and shelters at many bus stops. We want studies on bus lanes and implementation of bus lanes in congested areas in the city of Cincinnati. And we want a tax levy on the ballot of a certain size for certain improvements. And that also allowed us to shape not just our message, but the kinds of things that community leaders and elected officials could talk about on their end. Right. Next slide, please. Another is we did some work of our own. So I'm a city planner by trade. I got my master's in community planning at DAP here at UC, finished that in 2018. So I had a planning background. A lot of folks within the group were more on the activist side, people who are real good at speaking in public and getting folks to listen, and just bus riders, and bus riders know the system best. So some projects we worked on were the creation of our own bus plan. So Metro didn't really have a Metro and the electeds didn't really have a like set plan that they were working to. Things were just sort of getting worse over time. So we wanted to offer a positive vision of what expansion could look like. So the group, led by me, ran or curated what we called the Hamilton County Bus Plan. And that was said, hey, if we raise the sales tax by a certain amount, we'll be able to fund this many new bus lines, and we'll be able to increase frequencies on this many lines, and we'll be able to build some bus rapid transit routes and improve our bus stops and stations and modernize the fleet. And that was based on me being a planner and knowing other planners who had gone to DAP and been alums. I knew some of the folks that worked in Metro's planning department. I was able to get from them a lot of data on the system, ridership data at the route level, at the bus stop level, financial data, how much does it actually cost to run a bus route for a certain number of hours a day for the whole year? How much does Metro actually pay for buses? That can vary widely depending on the bus type, et cetera, all public data. And that helped craft that plan. In addition, once I had received the bus stop level ridership, we were able to determine which stops had the highest number of boardings a day. And, anecdotally, you could probably guess based on what you see around the city, seeing people standing at bus stops. But this allowed us to put numbers behind that. So we started demanding benches and shelters at certain bus stops. And that actually led to us constructing some of our own benches. I have a little woodworking experience, others have more. We ended up cutting some lumber. You can see that in the left page there, painting them up, dropping them off at very busy bus stops, and essentially bike locking them to a pole or fence. That helped raise awareness. It showed that we were willing to actually do work and do things and kind of be a little provocative. And other cities have done, other transit advocacy groups in other cities have done similar things as well. And it kind of raised that point in the media and in public conversation, like, hey, this random group of people are putting out benches, Metro could get on it. And then finally, we pushed for a bus lane downtown on Main Street from 5th Street to Central Parkway. And that was identified as one of the highest boarding area in the city, where people are getting on the bus, either at Government Square or along Main Street, a huge number of bus trips per day, and quite a lot of congestion, especially during rush hour PM times. That was something we were able to get city council to do by showing them the number of people that are riding buses, like the actual load count from Metro on every bus that comes through there, congestion data from the city itself, and car count data to show that even though cars are making up the majority of vehicles, the majority of people were in buses. Next slide, please. This was an example of a data product that we put out showing, this was Route 4 on Montgomery Road at the time, showing the route, where the loads were the highest, and where boardings and alightings or deboardings were occurring. And for a lot of electeds, this was, and quite frankly, some of the sorter board, this was the first time this data had been put in front of them in a way that wasn't just like a spreadsheet. And that helped us be taken a bit more seriously. Like, we actually know what we're talking about. We've got the stories and the anecdotes, but we also got the data. We can prove that there's a problem. Next slide, please. Yep. So once we had established the organization and set what we wanted to do and what our goals were, we needed to start swaying the powerful people in town. So if you're from Cincinnati, and it's probably the same in most Ohio cities, obviously you have your elected officials, but the business community is a very powerful player. The city of Cincinnati has a large number of big corporations, and the business community is quite strong. And if you're going to get a big tax levy on the ballot, you basically need to get their support, or they'll try to kill it. And then finally, labor, particularly unions, were very, very important to getting this passed and getting the support for such a tax increase. So next slide, please. So let's time travel back. It's 2017, it's 2018. So these were a lot of the power players in the region. The 9 city council members at that time, mostly Democrats, an independent, and 2 Republicans. Mayor John Cranley, the county commissioners, particularly Todd Portune, a very interesting man named Dusty Rhodes, who ended up being very important to getting this passed, and some local state house reps, particularly I have Mr. Bill Seitz there on the there. So the reason that this was important to get all these folks aligned is if you have political support, it becomes easier to pass a levy, and it becomes easier to not have people opposing a levy. If you can't get somebody's support, at least you can get them to not say anything. And getting all these folks aligned was key here. So next slide, please. So, we make jokes about politicians, but most electeds I find are sincere. They do want to make positive changes for their community. Obviously, they want to get reelected. They need to show they're doing stuff that solve real world problems. And like all of us, a lot of folks, they're an expert on something or a few things. They don't know everything, and that's fine. It's not everybody's job to know everything. And in the case of public transportation, there were very, very few elected officials that really had any knowledge of public transit, even of Cincinnati's public transit system, because it wasn't something that they dealt with up to that point, despite the city massively funding the bus system. And of course, the county not providing any money, it was not quite on their radar. But we needed their support, and also their voice, to get other folks on board. So we ended up attempting to set up meetings with every one of those folks, and other mayors and township trustees and council members from suburban municipalities where we would need support. I email blasted every single person I could. The vast majority of people responded. We met like sit down meeting in their offices or at Coffee Emporium. That's where they all like to go, to discuss what we wanted, what the plan was, and how they could help. So, clearly defining the problem. Metro is not going to expand and modernize and be a 21st century bus system without new investment. The city of Cincinnati cannot shoulder the tax burden alone, particularly because so many jobs and residents and services have been suburbanizing over the decades. And then why the solutions were worth the political cost and lift of a new tax levy. So everybody always talks about we're going to connect people to jobs, right? We need to connect people to all those higher paying jobs and, lift people up. Well, this is a big way that you do it. You cannot connect to jobs in Blue Ash and Fairfield and Springdale and Sharonville unless you have more money, because those routes did not exist at the time and they weren't going to without new funding. Healthcare access. Cincinnati in particular has huge disparities in childhood health outcomes and equity. And so, with a high amount of no-car households, a stronger bus system connecting folks to hospitals and medical clinics is key to really addressing those healthcare disparities. Education access. You can't learn at school if you don't go to school. A huge amount of Cincinnati high schoolers rely on Metro to get to and from high school, but also with large public and private universities in Cincinnati, and just the tremendous cost of attaining a college degree, having much better bus service to and from colleges and universities and vocational programs is something to address with a better bus system. stronger local economy, better environment for filling jobs. A lot of these larger, warehouse, logistics, transportation companies, they build their big facilities out on the Beltway. They open it, and then they realize that a lot of their workforce they hire from doesn't have cars. And there aren't buses where they go. And Metro can't provide that service because they don't have money. So all of these factors were key to getting the electeds to see that it's a big ask to ask for a countywide sales tax levy, but the benefits will be enormous. Next slide, please. Business community. This is America. Businesses exist. They make profits. Companies act to increase their profits and sales and change the world. It's a fact of life in this country. And whatever differences folks in the bus coalition had about the business community, it was very obvious to us that if you're going to pass such a levy at the county level, you're going to need support from the business community, not just so they don't oppose it, but because they're the ones who write the big checks to pass levies. And in order to pass a transit levy in Hamilton County, something that had never passed and had failed repeatedly over the decades, this was going to be key to its success. Next slide, please. So, over the years, the business community had studied transit reform in Hamilton County, various studies that had, quite frankly, sat on the shelf for years. In 2014, there was a study called the Metro Futures Task Force that was led by numerous business folks throughout the city and Hamilton County that essentially said that Metro needs a new funding source if it is to expand and get to serve new places and serve existing places better. But obviously, when you're asking for a new tax levy, you're going to have to do some swaying of your own here. So, a declining bus system, as with the electeds, the argument of the declining bus system and inability to get to those outlying areas impedes job growth and economic growth. Overnight bus service and particularly pretty bad weekend service and pretty bad, after 9-10 p.m. service really limited the amount of folks who were working second and third shift jobs to get to and from work. And maybe they could get to work, but not back, or vice versa. And that limited the labor pool, particularly, a lot of jobs in the burbs or out by the airport or on 275. These employers are open 24 hours a day. They have shifts throughout the day. And just a bus system that primarily is set around the 9 to 5 schedule doesn't cut it. The existing funding model, this was key here. The earnings tax in the city of Cincinnati is essentially a payroll tax, but it also does tax corporate profits for companies that are headquartered in the city. And there's a formula about that. It's not all of their profits. It's like profits that they drew from that location. But anyway, the likes of Kroger, P&G, Fifth Third, Western and Southern, they paid a percentage of their profits towards the city of Cincinnati, which they do not like to do. And then finally, availability and price of parking in downtown and the uptown area means it's, a shortage of parking means you got to build parking garages. That's very expensive. You got to maintain them over time. You got to pour more money into your road system and highways, and that just increases the cost of growth. Particularly if you work downtown or go downtown, there's not, you might find a little spot here or there, but parking is not free. So making these arguments to them, meeting particularly with the Cincinnati Chamber of Commerce folks, and trying to really push the message that this is a big ask. It's a sales tax levy that would, replace the city earnings tax, which would allow the system to regionalize. That, even with the increase in that sales tax, that this would be a net positive for us and also their businesses. That one was a little harder than the elected officials, because business leaders are not elected officials and they don't have to do things publicly. However, once we had established ourselves as a serious organization that had data, that knew what we were talking about, and had a unified vision, one that could be beneficial for the business community. It became easier to meet with them. It became easier to have them listen. And eventually the bus coalition started to become included in, they always talk about the meeting before the meeting. So those are real. And we started being included in those, where decisions were starting to be made about what a levy would look like, who would be supporting it, who would be cutting checks. And that went a long way to finally getting it on the ballot and then passing. Next slide, please. Finally, labor. Last but certainly not least. Labor unions, particularly in Ohio, particularly in Cincinnati, are quite strong politically. They have the ability to raise a lot of money. They have a large membership, folks that are very passionate about the industry they're in, and also workers of other unions. So Metro's drivers and mechanics are represented by the ATU Local 627. Obviously, they were in support of a new tax levy because that means that they could get more work and get paid better and have better benefits, and improve the community. And that was an easy slam dunk ask there. But getting other local unions on board to support, whether with their pocketbooks or with manpower from their membership to actually go out and do the on the ground campaigning, that was a bigger pull. However, they all understood that you cannot, increase the number of union jobs at Metro or really increase pay and benefits without a major infusion of permanent funding stream. So over time, we met with the leaders of a lot of unions in Cincinnati. A few of them are listed here. And obviously, Metro being represented by bargaining units meant that any new jobs created would be good paying union jobs. And eventually the labor unions did support and put a lot of time and resources towards the levy campaign. So as I get to the end here, so all of that was about, why did we want to do stuff? Who did we want to involve and what did we do? And then finally a levy had to be run. So next slide, please. The levy, I was not actually involved in the campaign. By that point, when it was on the ballot, I had gone to work at Metro. But the rest of the bus coalition did a stellar job, boots on the ground, knocking doors. The business community writes checks. They do not knock doors. Labor, they'll do both. But we got ordinary bus riders who wanted to spread the word to knock doors throughout Cincinnati and Hamilton County. We really targeted places like Forest Park and Springdale, Blue Ash, the inner ring suburbs. And by that point, surprisingly, Coleraine Township had historically not been super friendly to the bus, but over time, the leaders had changed and they were very excited to have more bus service. A lot of these suburban municipalities were either Republican or mixed politically, but not all, most saw the benefit of an increased bus system, whether or not they actually supported this specific tax levy. But it was put on the ballot, the campaign was run, and it passed. 50.36% yes. Now in Ohio, 50% plus one is a win. In some states, you need higher margins to pass a large levy, but here it passed. It was a 25-year sales tax levy, which means we'll be going for it again in 2045. And now we are 4 years into expansion, something I'm personally working on at my job, but also is really been championed now by city and county leadership, that they see that this money has actually improved the bus system and the buses are newer and we are installing benches and shelters and we are, putting new bus lines out in the city and in the county, and we are running overnight. So it wasn't just that we wanted these things to happen and we said we wanted them to do them. We got the money and then it did happen. And next slide, please. So to wrap it all up, you got to be taken seriously. When you involve yourself in levy campaigns or, trying to get the word out about things, you will run into all kinds of crazy people, crazy good and crazy bad. But you want to be serious. You don't want, folks to think you're just a weirdo who is obsessed with buses and wants more money for them and No, there's a plan here. We offered solutions, which we thought were reasonable. Some did not. And we married, the narrative and personal stories with data, facts, and real world observations. If you just have stories, that's one thing. If you just have data, that's one thing. If you have both, and that's very powerful for narrative building. We built relationships with the right people, the electeds that needed to be on board, the business community, neighborhood councils in the city of Cincinnati and neighborhood business districts, labor, and just the bus riding population at large. And at the end of the day, we always tried to do what we thought was the right thing. And so we started in 2017. It took 1, 2, 3 years for a levy to be put on a ballot after asking for several election cycles. And then it passed. And here we are today. And if I could do it over again, I would.
Thank you so much for this presentation, Mark. This is honestly so heartening to see. This grassroots advocacy bringing together, diverse sets of stakeholders and achieving results, especially, such transformative results for the bus network in Hamilton County.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to open it up to questions at this point. Does anyone have questions for Mark? The little time that we have left in this meeting.
I have a question here in Youngstown.
Mm-hmm.
That's congratulations. That's really a tremendously positive, good story, especially since Cincinnati never ever passed a levy before. How did you, and it seems like 25 years is a long time, which is good, but how did you determine the 25-year thing? And also on your bullet point under key points where it says build relationships with the right people and avoid the wrong people. Who were the wrong people? Who are the wrong people to avoid?
So the first part, the 25-year thing. So there's a quirk of Ohio law where a permanent levy, like one that is just there and doesn't have to be voted on for approval, permanent levies can be repealed at the ballot box. So if there was some sort of anti-tax fervor or anti-transit fervor in the future, such a levy could be overturned through a citizen-initiated or county commissioner-initiated referendum. But if there's a time limit on the levy, it's a quirk in the law where it's significantly harder to remove the levy, and like action would need to be taken at the state house. So when the levy was going to the ballot and like the actual referendum was being written, lawyers, some pretty good lawyers, reviewed ballot language and try to come up with a solution to the indefinite problem. 25 years was seen as long term. I don't know why exactly 25 years and not 30 or whatever, but 25 years is a long time. Second question, so the wrong people. So at a certain point, you realize you're not going to sway somebody. They're not going to listen to your opinion. Don't waste your time. Most people can be swayed one way or another, and most people are like happy to listen to arguments, but certain folks, and some of them were electeds, some of them were community leaders, some of them were other activist groups in town around other issues. We learned pretty quickly who was definitely not going to change their mind. And we also tried to avoid diluting our message with we supported other advocacy groups, labor groups, active transportation advocates, bike ped, 99% of Cincinnati Metro bus riders start or end their journey on foot. So finding the right ones and trying to stay away from the folks that were not very serious or quite frankly, were just very negative. And I'll say one of the most disappointing was, I hate to say it, but some of the big streetcar advocates in town were very upset that the plan did not involve money for a rail expansion, which, just to be frank here, like at that time, I don't think rail expansion would pass in Hamilton County. It might pass in the city of Cincinnati, but that's a longer term vision and something I hope to work on in the future with further public transit investment. But it became pretty clear that like there was a group of folks that when I was younger, I read their posts and followed them and was big on the streetcar and loving that. And then like, where were they when it came to the bus? And we learned that, well, we didn't want to exclude them, but and a bunch of those folks were very supportive, but it's kind of like a don't meet your heroes thing, right? But yeah, it's kind of hard to define what the wrong people is, but you know them when you see them.
Thank you.
We have a raised hand. You can go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, this is Al and Al Nippert, and I worked very hard on the effort to save the Cincinnati Southern for the city, but that neither here nor there. But the important thing is it would be desirable if some of these municipalities could form a purchasing group. There's certainly more than one bus manufacturer, more than one source of parts, but there's certainly been power in purchasing organizations, as hospitals and HMOs have proved out in another industry. So if there's a way for these cities and counties to put their transit purchasing power in, which they don't really seem to be doing.
Yeah.
Folks with Sorta and in Dayton and they're all in their own little buckets, and I just think we're missing a real opportunity to do a better job of managing the funds coming from these tax bases. Any comments on that? And I'll step back.
You're right. You know, it's like this in Cincinnati, it's like this in Ohio. Everybody is siloed into their area. It's very parochial. You know, a lot of Cincinnatians do not view themselves as Ohioans, even though they're wrong. You know, and so I know just from working at Metro, there's certain things that the different larger transit agencies in Ohio do to share costs, such as they all are on the same like risk pool kind of insurance. But in terms of like buying buses or equipment, yeah, everybody just kind of does their own thing. You know, Metro's got a standing bus order with Gillig for 25 to 30 bus replacements a year, and then on top of that, however many buses we need for expansion. But yeah, and you know, Cleveland's the big player. They are by far the largest transit agency in the state, in Cuyahoga County. But you know, I think in Northeast Ohio, they might be doing certain things with like Lake Tran and in County of the East, sharing some resources. But you know, the statewide, I think, you know, especially as we look to the future of, you know, electrification or, you know, alternative fuel buses, those are not cheap. Like, you know, a battery electric bus is like $1 million a pop. And, you know, the feds will pay 80% of that, but not all the time. And you're right. Really pooling resources in Ohio. You know, Ohio always got a lot of mid-sized cities. You know, there's not one giant city. So, you know, further integration in purchasing parts and supplies and buses, I think, would go a long way to saving quite a bit of money for everybody.
Jason, you can unmute and ask your question.
A great presentation. For me, for years I enjoyed transfers and even enjoyed delays in Cincinnati because there was always something to do right downtown there. though now you've been caught up in that nationwide trend of very unattractive bus stops, stations, inner city bus stations being moved to very
Yeah.
unattractive locations. And I'm wondering how you've been fighting that.
Yeah. So when Greyhound moved from their downtown by the casino location out to they're in Arlington Heights now. It was like one of those things where nobody involved was happy with it, but like nobody really did anything. Um, there was a lot of statements from like the city of Cincinnati or Hamilton County, what a tragedy. But nobody like stepped forward to actually give Greyhound space downtown. Which would, like there's the Riverfront Transit Center, which is kind of purposely built for commuter, rail and buses and inner city stuff in the past. And it's just kind of a glorified parking garage now. But they ended up in Arlington Heights. That's where they bought land. The village of Arlington Heights was super not about that for various reasons. But at Metro, what we did was, and we stay in contact with the Greyhound Barron's Bus folks. We extended our service out directly into their lot with the Route 43, which does serve downtown, but like it's still a long ride out there. And if you're not coming from the Reading Road corridor or downtown, then you're transferring. It's the overnight branch, so it's running 24 hours, but still not ideal. We actually, one thing we've been working on in our planning department is having some kind of shared stop agreement with Greyhound where maybe their hub isn't downtown, but certain buses maybe get off the highway downtown, stop near Government Square so people can get on and off at least in downtown before it continues to its end of line in Arlington Heights. I think in an ideal world, there would just be a unified intercity bus rail hub, whether that's, at Union Terminal or Riverfront Transit Center or wherever, probably Union Terminal because that's where the rail goes. And I think in the future that would be excellent. But it's kind of something where like Greyhound bus riders just sort of get ignored. If we were talking about airline passengers, like this problem would have been solved, but we're not.
Yeah, amen. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone have any other questions for Mark?
This is Al again. And has anything been thought about interstate such as to the airport from Cincinnati? That's always been one of the great problem areas. And it's been, if you look back to Jim Bunning and Jim Bunning's proposal of a monorail, which was really a red herring, because that would make it a non-interchangeable, unique system that was designed to failure from the beginning, which was, frankly, I believe the highway lobby's effort at let's try this, and everybody gets excited about the rebirth of a Wuppertal monorail when it ain't going to happen. And if it did happen, it would be stillborn because it would be an orphan.
Yep. Yeah, we call those gadget bonds. And there's always some huckster, pushing their new thing, right? Whether it's Hyperloop or some kind of suspended monorail thing, which like if they figure that out and it works, like cool, but it doesn't. So currently to the airport, Tank, the Transit Authority of Northern Kentucky, runs their express bus, the 2X from downtown to CVG, but it's a 30-minute service, and it just sits in whatever traffic is happening on 75 and 275 out there. So not necessarily the most reliable option because that stretch is very backed up and is only going to get worse when they start building this new bridge and expanding the highway. So there's since the airport's in Kentucky and that's Tank's territory, there's really nothing stopping better integration between services from Ohio continuing into Kentucky and setting up, bus bus lanes or bus on shoulder on 75 to bypass traffic. The quirk there is since it's in Kentucky state law about transit funding is very strict. Basically, only Louisville and Lexington are allowed to have dedicated transit taxes. So, like the Northern Kentucky system relies on begging each of the 3 counties for money every 2 years, which makes long-term planning impossible because you don't know what your budget's going to look like. And it also means that, a route could just get cut if the counties just don't want to pay for it anymore. So solving that issue, which would basically require changes to the state law in Kentucky, would be the first step to much better regional integration, particularly serving, the airport and Amazon, DHL, all that stuff down there where a lot of people work.
Thank
Like
you
you think
for that
Ohio
insight.
Transit's bad. If you think Ohio Transit's bad, in Kentucky, it's not so great. Unfortunately, because Louisville and Lexington deserve much better bus systems than they have now, and they're just not getting them. And Northern Kentucky as well.
And we have a raised hand from our group in Youngstown.
Yes, my name is Bill. My question is in regards to the bus replacement every 6 years. How did they come up with that, and how many miles in the Cincinnati system do they put on in 6 years?
So it's the average age of the fleet. We want to be 6 years. So we typically replace buses on a 12-year schedule. That's based on a few things. One being that the federal guidelines for bus replacements basically depreciate the cost of the bus over 12 years. So once a bus is fully depreciated, it can be replaced with federal money again. But you need to have the local match, right? So the feds will pay about 70 to 80% of a bus replacement. Addition to the fleet, that's a different grant program. But so, you still got to come up with the other 20 to 30%. So like Metro before the levy passed had no margin, like there was no extra money. So they just put off bus replacements, which in the short term saves you money, in the long term really kills your fleet. But so the 6-year average age just means that you're on that 12-year replacement schedule. So currently we're back at 6 years, which is good. But generally a bus will go over those 12 years anywhere from 500,000 to 750,000 miles, depending on how we use it. And once you pass that 500,000 mile mark, that's when the bus issues really start getting worse with maintenance, more frequent breakdowns. You can't find part replacements because the model year is so old. And then you end up spending much more on maintenance, and then now you have even less money for operations. But so sticking to that 12-year replacement is the ideal if you can afford it.
Thank you.
Alrighty, well, we are nearing time, but I'd like to once again thank Mark for this very informative presentation. I guess we have perhaps time for one more quick question, Paul.
Yeah, it wasn't about the talk in general. That's why I wanted to wait till you were done with that part. I want to put in a plug for the final push to get the redistricting commission issue on the ballot in November.
Mm-hmm.
The folks gathering petition signatures are out there in force right now. The deadline is in about 4 weeks, and you can find them in shopping center parking lots, post offices, events. We need to get rid of this super gerrymandered political system we've got here. So that and the minimum wage increase, they're out there hustling every day to get your signature for to put those issues on the ballot against the powers that be.
Alrighty, thank you
I
for that.
think we need to be careful about mixing messages.
I am only speaking for myself.
Yeah, thank you to everyone who has attended the call, and thank you once again to Mark, because sort of conversations around what can be done at a local level and from a grassroots level is so important in general for all sorts of issues. especially when we even think about the history of passenger rail in the state, and that's one of All Aboard Ohio's mission, has generally fallen around the theme of missed opportunities and inaction. And now we're trying to sort of switch that around by, constantly bringing together stakeholders, talking about the impacts, the benefits, and making sure that that missed opportunity isn't the theme once again. So thank you to Mark for today's talk. And I'd also like to direct everyone towards the All Aboard Ohio website, where you can join us as a member or renew your membership. And most importantly, July 13th, we're about a month away from our annual meeting. So if you go to allaboardohio.org, you can click register. It'll take you to a registration page, and then you can purchase tickets for our event. So I would encourage everyone to do so. But that is all we had planned for today's statewide meeting. And I'd like once again to thank everyone for attending and to have a great rest of your weekend.
Thank you. Take care.